Good morning, everyone. My name is Michael Doherty. I'm the district attorney, and I appreciate you coming out today for an update on the King Soopers case. Today is April 22nd. It is 1 month since the horrific attack that tragically ended 10 lives at King Soopers and impacted countless others. And I will say at the start of this press conference, as with every time we meet, that the defendant is innocent unless and until proven guilty. That presumption of innocence remains with him throughout the entire criminal proceedings, and the charges against him are merely an accusation. The public has a right to be informed, and as district attorney, I take that right very seriously. But as district attorney, I must and I will also work hard to ensure that the defendant has a right to a fair and public trial here in Boulder County. I am allowed to share information that's in the public record, and I'll be doing that today, but not detailed statements about the evidence. We sent out the amended charges in advance so that the media and the community would have time to look them over in preparation for today's press briefing. And I do want to highlight that the Boulder Police Department is here today. There are members of the Boulder Police Department in front, as well as Deputy Chief Carrie Weinheimer. Chief Harold had a scheduling conflict today, but I appreciate Deputy Chief Weinheimer being here because it really is a united effort to ensure that justice is done for all the victims. The response since March 22nd has been absolutely incredible. The response from community members, the memorials for the victims, vigils for the victims, really beautiful funeral services for each of them, the tremendous support generated by the community to help the victims' families. Our community has come together and united for all the victims in response to this crisis, and it's why I believe this community will move forward together. It's going to be a long and difficult journey. I recognize that, particularly for the victims and their loved ones, but also for everyone here in Boulder County and throughout the state of Colorado. So I would remind folks, and I'm going to ask for the media's help in getting the word out, of the Boulder Strong Resource Center, which is available not just to victims, but to all community members here in Boulder County who are suffering, who would benefit from meeting with a counselor or having support. So I encourage folks to visit the Boulder Strong Resource Center. That's going to be open for months to come. And I really encourage folks to take good care of themselves, continue to come together, and move forward together past this crisis. The response from law enforcement, our federal, state, and local partners has also been incredible. From the very first moments after the shooting took place, up until today and throughout the entire pendency of this prosecution, federal, state, and local agencies have been working as a team around the clock to make sure that the investigation and prosecution goes exactly as it should. And I promise you that we will work tirelessly to make sure that justice is done. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, the U.S. Attorney's Office, the ATF, and local law enforcement agencies continue to work together, and they came together in the very first moments after the shooting, and that work continues today. The response from victim advocates has been absolutely incredible. We want to make sure we do everything we can to honor and support the victims and help their families through this difficult time. So we have victim advocates assigned to each one of the victim families in this case. And they're working incredibly hard to make sure that the families have the resources and support that they need during this unimaginably difficult time. And that's going to continue, and it's because of the victims and their families that we're here today. And that we're going to work as hard as we possibly can to reach the right outcome and to ensure that the shooter is held fully accountable. I also want to just briefly acknowledge King Soopers, because since the day of the attack, King Soopers has provided support and resources for not only the victims and King Soopers employees, but also for the community. And in fact, just this past weekend, King Soopers allowed us to arrange for site visits for any family member, victim, police officer, who wanted to go back to the King Soopers as part of their healing process. So throughout the weekend, Saturday, Sunday, in fact, into Monday, we had people going to King Soopers. And King Soopers has been an incredible partner in doing whatever they can to support the victims and the community during this time. As you're aware, the prosecution has now filed additional charges against the defendant, so I'll go through those briefly with you at this point. Counts 1 through 9 are murder in the first degree counts for each of the civilians who were killed outside and inside King Soopers on March 22nd. For murder in first degree, the maximum penalty in the state of Colorado is life without the possibility of parole. Each one of those victims are listed in the order in which they're killed. So if you look at count 1, Nevin Stanisic was killed outside in the parking lot, and you go through count 9, Suzanne Fountain was the final civilian killed inside of King Soopers. So they're listed in the order and sequence in which things happened. One thing I'll highlight for you that I think is a particularly important point is that all of the civilian victims, all of the people, were shot and killed before Officer Talley and other officers entered the King Soopers. So those first 9 counts are people, our community members, who were tragically struck down on March 22nd. And then Officer Talley and other police officers bravely charged in. And that brings us to count 10, which is the murder in the first degree charge as related to Officer Talley of the Boulder Police Department. Then we turn to the attempted murder charges, which are class 2 felonies, and they carry a sentence of 16 to 48 years in state prison. Again, these attempted murder charges are all listed in the sequence in which they happened. So if you start with the first victim on the attempted murder charge and go through the last victim before turning to the police officers, all of those are in the order that we believe they took place. There's 2 different ways that murder in the first degree or attempted murder in the first degree can be charged. One is with intent and after deliberation, and the other is under circumstances evidencing a universal malice and extreme indifference to the value of human life generally. They knowingly engage in conduct which creates a grave risk of death to another person other than himself. So you'll see for some of the victims, depending on the circumstances, they're charged either as intent and after deliberation and/or extreme indifference. I'm going to move ahead to the attempted murder counts against the police officers who responded to the calls for help at King Soopers. You'll see there they're broken into 2 different categories. One is the first law enforcement response. You see 3 officers named as victims in that category. These are the 2 officers who responded along with Officer Talley. So there were 3 officers in that initial response, 2 of whom survived. So Officer Brian Capobianco and Officer Pam Gignac are victims of an alleged attempted murder, and that's an F2 count as well, and it carries a sentence of 16 to 48 years. And this is a fact alleged that I want to highlight for you. Less than 30 seconds later, so less than 30 seconds after Officer Talley was shot and killed, and the other 2 officers were victims of attempted murder, a second wave of officers then engaged and went into King Soopers. That is less than 30 seconds later. And you see those officers listed as well, and victims of either attempted murder with intent and after deliberation or attempted murder under extreme indifference. I'll highlight a couple things for you about those officers who are alleged as victims here. One is you'll see Officer Capobianco listed twice. He's listed as an attempted murder victim for when he charged into the store without delay, along with Officer Talley and Officer Gignac. And then he was part of the second wave of officers that charged in again less than 30 seconds after Officer Talley was tragically struck down. Also, I want to highlight for you that this is where that interagency response I referenced really started. One of the officers, Officer Brandon Braun, who's listed in count 37, is actually an officer with the CU Police Department. As many of you know, the University of Colorado Boulder has their own police force, and officers from CU Police Department were part of the response that was brought to bear after calls for help went out from King Soopers. And Officer Braun is alleged under count 37 to be a victim of attempted murder in the first degree. Similarly, there was a deputy from the sheriff's office, Deputy Brunkow, who responded. He's listed under count 41. And then under count 42, a ranger from Open Space, Boulder County Open Space, Samuel Kilburn, who responded. And he's a victim of an alleged count of attempted murder in the first degree. Count 43 is a charge of assault in the first degree. There was one individual who was injured as a result of what took place at King Soopers. She was fleeing an attempt to get away and went down and fractured her T6 vertebrae. So she was injured, and she's alleged to be a victim of assault in the first degree, which is a Class 3 felony and carries a penalty of 10 to 32 years. Then we have the counts related to the large capacity magazines, which, as you know, in Colorado, a magazine is permitted to carry up to 15 rounds. If it carries more than 15 and it's used during the commission of a felony or a crime of violence, such as murder in the first degree or attempt to commit murder in the first degree, it's a Class 6 felony, and it carries a sentence of 6 to 18 months. I have one or two other comments, and then I'll take questions from the press. First, all the counts that I've listed are arguably counts that can run consecutive if the defendant is sentenced for these crimes, so they can run one on top of the other. They represent victims who have a right to be heard and supported, so that's why these additional charges are being filed, to recognize all the victims in this case. You'll be seeing additional counts, I anticipate, of what's called crimes of violence, as well as possibly additional counts of attempted murder. The investigation is still in the very early stages, but I do believe at this point that you'll be seeing additional counts. I want to highlight something you've already heard, but I think bears repeating. No civilians were shot and killed after Boulder police officers and other law enforcement entered the King Soopers. That first entry by Officer Talley, Officer Capobianco, and Officer Gignac, they charged in, and less than 30 seconds after Officer Talley was tragically shot and killed, a second wave of officers, including again Officer Capobianco, charged back into the King Soopers. I want to be really clear on that because I've seen some reports out there that I imagine are very distressing to the people involved, that the delay was long and that Boulder PD and other law enforcement should have responded faster. This response was within 30 seconds of Officer Talley being shot and killed. So I just want to be really clear with you so you can help get the word out to the community about that. As you're aware, there is one police officer who fired his weapon at the defendant. The defendant was shot as a result of that gunfire. It's believed that that police officer fired his handgun approximately 7 times and shot the defendant once. We have a multi-agency team of the best detectives and investigators here in Boulder County that respond to any officer-involved shooting, including this one. Part of our standard protocol and what's required by state law is that the Boulder PD, since their officer discharged his weapon, not participate in that investigation. So that officer-involved shooting is currently being investigated pursuant to our standard protocol and the requirements under law. And I would anticipate within the next month or so having a decision on whether that shooting was justified or not. And then we'll be sharing that information out with the community as soon as possible. So why don't I stop here, and I'm happy to take a few questions if you have any at all. Yes, ma'am.
How many large capacity magazines did he have? How much ammo did they each hold? Where were they bought? And were they assembled as a parts kit or altogether?
That's a bunch of questions. But in all seriousness, if I don't answer one of them, just ask me again, okay? So based on the information available to us at this point, we don't have any reason to believe they were sold illegally. In other words, if there was a store or dealer that sold the magazines illegally, charges could be filed and would be filed against that store or individual. We don't have any indication at this point, but it's still in the early stages of the investigation, and we're still looking into that. Just one second. For the large capacity magazines, that means any magazine that's capable of holding more than 15 rounds. There were 10 magazines found either on the shooter or in his vehicle, but it's 10 total. As far as the number of bullets and such, I have that information, but it's not relevant to the charges, so I'm not going to get into how many bullets he had with him at that time. Does that answer your questions?
Yeah, and where were they bought?
Sorry.
Where were they bought?
So I'm not going to share just yet the details around where each one of those are bought, and that's in part because that's still being investigated and looked into for some of the magazines. Yes, sir.
Sorry for interrupting.
No, it's okay.
Where does the investigation now stand as far as establishing a motive for this shooting, and has any terror-related connection, even inspiration by terror groups, been ruled out?
So good questions, thank you. So the question, if you didn't hear it, was about whether there's any indication as to motive and whether there's any connection to terrorism. What I would say is I'm especially grateful that the FBI and other agencies are working together on this case and pulling apart all the information, all the electronic devices, all the evidence that they possibly can to uncover any motive. At this point, we don't have information about a specific motive. I understand the community, and certainly the victims' families want to know why that King Soopers and why Boulder. When and if we have that information, we'll certainly share it with the community. I know that in other mass shootings that have taken place across the United States, there have been times where they were unable to ever identify a motive. And you don't need motive to prove that someone acted with intent and after deliberation in court. But for our community, and especially for those families, they want to know why. So we're going to keep working as hard as we can to uncover that. And once we do, if we do, we'll share that with you.
Is the defendant cooperating?
Is the defendant cooperating? Well, the defendant has a right to remain silent, and he has attorneys assigned to him to represent him. Yeah. I'm sorry.
During the last news conference, you talked about going through that store methodically, removing groceries from the shelves, and doing a thorough investigation inside. How important was that in terms of coming up with these additional charges of attempted murder?
Thank you for your question. So the crime scene processing was incredibly important to the prosecution of this case, and the FBI evidence recovery team, as well as the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, along with the detectives from the Boulder Police Department, did an outstanding job preserving the crime scene and then processing the crime scene to make sure we have all the evidence we need to file these charges and also move forward with a successful prosecution that will result in the shooter being held accountable. That is our goal, and they approached the crime scene with that in mind. So they went through the entire supermarket. They did a painstaking and thorough investigation, just as they should, in response to a tragic incident of this nature. That took days, obviously, and then they completed the work and released the supermarket back to King Soopers.
Have you come across any evidence that would indicate that the alleged shooter had been in the store prior to the shooting?
So the question is, did we come across any information that the alleged shooter had been in the store prior to the shooting? And at this point, the answer is no. But again, the investigation's in the early stages, and we'll still have a long ways to go in terms of being able to answer that definitively.
On the magazines, you said there's no evidence that they were sold illegally. So were these like grandfathered ones or purchased somewhere else? Can you shed any light on where he got them?
So at this point, I can't comment more directly on the magazines. I wanted to answer the question about whether we believe them to have been purchased illegally, because I think that's something the community would want to know. But at this point, in terms of the details around the magazines, I'm going to let the charges speak for themselves. They were possessed unlawfully, and it's the people's allegations that they were used unlawfully. Mitchell?
Could you explain the difference between the two theories of attempted murder and why some victims are named in one or the other or both?
Sure. So good question. So why are there two different theories of murder or attempted murder in the first degree? The first is with intent and after deliberation, and just using a hypothetical, for example, if an individual points a gun at another person and then tries to kill the person, that's with intent and after deliberation, just to put it in a simple example for you. If someone points a gun at a number of people and fires a shot that could have hit any of them and caused them to be in grave risk of death, that's what's referred to as extreme indifference. And that's my general explanation, but the reason for the allegations in this case. Allison?
Yeah, two unrelated questions. One is the officer who fired at the gunman and is on leave for the OIS investigation. Is he named as a victim in this?
He is named as a victim in this, yes.
Okay. And the second question is, what can you tell us about the search warrant in the gunman's house, the alleged gunman's house, what you found in there, and any other information you got from that search?
So I can tell you that with the cooperation of the FBI, CBI, and the Boulder Police Department, as well as other agencies, that the investigation and the search for evidence has been and continues to be extremely thorough. It's exactly what it should be in response to this kind of attack. The search warrants that were executed at different locations have been sealed by order of the court, so I'm not permitted to share with you at this time more than that due to the court order. Thank you.
Do you know the number of people that were in the store at the time he entered?
Do I know the number of people in the store at the time? I believe that there were at least 115 people in the store at the time he entered, and at least 25 people in the parking lot at the time this began. And that's to the best of my knowledge at this point, and we'll give you more of an update as we move further along.
Do you know an idea of what the shooter was doing police and when he was apprehended?
So I have that information. I'm not going to get into detail about it now. I think it's a good question and something we'll be able to share in more detail as we go forward with the case.
Do you know how soon after entering the store Officer Talley was killed?
Officer Talley was killed within seconds of entering the store. And then Boulder police officers, the open space ranger, the sheriff's deputy, all bravely and courageously tried to get into the store as soon as they possibly could, and it was less than 30 seconds after Officer Talley was killed. Unfortunately, our time is up for today. I really appreciate you coming out, and we'll let you know when we have an additional update. One thing I would share with you and emphasize is the next court date is May 25th. That's scheduled for a status conference for the defendant to appear in court. I would anticipate that I'll speak with the media after the status conference on May 25th. And I don't anticipate having any other developments that I would be announcing between now and then, just so you have an idea of the schedule. And obviously, if anything comes up, we'll let you know. But just for planning purposes, the next court date is May 25th. Thank you so much, and I hope you all have a good day. You take care. Thanks.
I'm Colleen Slevin from AP, so it's from
Nice to meet you.
most of my